A ghost is haunting Europe, the ghost of communism. This phrase was coined by the famous philosopher Karl Marx in 1848 and became one of the world's most important predictions. In those days, it was very difficult to predict the rapid spread of communism in Europe. But Marx's words soon came true. Communist movements gained strength in Europe and major uprisings broke out in many countries. And today a ghost is haunting Russia, the ghost of freedom. And this ghost is raising the possibility that the protests in Russia could turn into a massive uprising. The latest news from Russia contains many clues. The riots in Russia could spell the end of Putin's political career. And this could be one of the critical events that change world history. Tensions are very high in Russia and the people want things to change. But what exactly is happening in Russia and how could these riots play out? We closely follow the protests in all the cities of Russia and the social-political debates of Russia. In this article, we have compiled all the developments and possible outcomes for you if you are ready. Let's get started. First of all, the specter of freedom circulating in Russia is very important. All Eastern countries, Russia in particular, have repressive governments. These rulers do not apply democratic rules and put pressure on the media. The activities of civil society organizations, universities, and independent journalists are restricted. Restrictions on people's way of life are increasing. But this situation has started to change in recent years, especially with the development of technology and the establishment of new communication networks. Repressive regimes have become completely helpless. People expressing their opinions on social media started to criticize the rulers. Independent journalists have also become more active through social media. The Russian people have been very affected by this process. The Russian people, especially those communicating through Telegram groups, started to realize Putin's lies. Many news that never appeared in the Russian press appeared on social media. Russian people also organized anti-war protests on social media. There were many protests every day in Moscow and St. Petersburg. The Russian police used violence to suppress these riots, and thousands of activists were detained. But the Russian people never gave up. The number of anti-Putin protesters in Russia is growing every day. This also affects political choices in Russia. Putin has been pressuring an anti-Western policy since he took office. He is also trying to make the Russian people hostile towards the West. But the Russian people have realized that Putin is lying and now want to be a Western country. As you know, the war and rivalry between the Eastern and Western countries has been going on since World War I. Russia is considered the most powerful country of the Eastern Bloc. Putin has always seen the West as the enemy and has escalated this rivalry. But young people in Russia don't want war anymore. That's why they want better relations with democratic Western countries. This could lead to a huge change in Russia's history. This change in Russia could be a milestone for world politics. If Russia decides to establish good relations with the West, the Eastern Bloc will be completely collapsed. As a result, conflicts and wars in many parts of the world would end. The demand of young people in Russia could lead to peace in the whole world. But it is not so easy. Russian President Putin is doing everything he can to keep his power. That is why he is trying to suppress the protests in Russia. The Russian people continue to revolt despite Putin's repression. The riots in Russia have increased more recently. The biggest reason for this is the increasing death toll in the Russian army. About 200,000 soldiers had died in the Russian army. The Russian army is suffering one of the biggest defeats in history. The success of the Ukrainian army in this war is being followed with interest by the whole world. The Ukrainian army has managed to establish a huge superiority over the Russian army. The Russian army lost power on all fronts of the war. Russia had to withdraw from most of the territories it occupied. The Ukrainian army has also announced a new operation to liberate the whole country. This statement has caused panic in Russia because everyone knows that the Russian army cannot win this war. They are worried that more Russian soldiers will die in the offensive launched by the Ukrainian army. The Russian people now think that it is necessary to withdraw from Ukraine as soon as possible, especially the families of the soldiers are calling for the Russian army to leave Ukraine. Russian people are chanting slogans during protests in any Russian cities, including Moscow. A group gathered in Moscow today said peace now. Now, the success of the Ukrainian army in this war is increasing the fear of the Russian people. The Russian people know that the Russian army must withdraw so that no more soldiers die because Ukrainian President Zelensky has also made a statement on this issue. Zelensky said that these operations will continue vigorously until the entire territory of Ukraine is liberated. Everyone saw that Zelensky never gives up. The Kremlin leaders panicked after these statements. Kremlin leaders thought Zelensky would give up. But Zelensky has been bravely defending his country since the beginning of the war. Zelensky has never accepted surrender and is doing his best to liberate all occupied territories. Zelensky's determination is also affecting the Ukrainian army. Ukrainian soldiers continue to fight bravely to the end Russian occupation. The Russian army suffers hundreds of casualties on the battlefield every day, seeing hundreds of soldiers dying every day. The Russian people are organizing more protests to end the war. The Kremlin leaders see both the Ukrainian army and the protesters in Russia as enemies, but they are not succeeding against either. The more the Ukrainian army increases its operations, the more the Russian people demand peace. According to experts, this process completely severed the emotional bond between the Russian people and Putin. The Russian people thought that they had a very strong ruler. However, seeing that Putin was helpless against Zelensky, the Russian people experienced a great disappointment. The Russian people now realize that amenity with the West is useless. That's why they want to have good relations with the West and live freely. The demand for freedom in Russia is growing every day. Moreover, in the states that are part of the Russian Federation, these demands are increasing even more. Many countries, such as Bashkortostan and Chechnya, want to gain their independence from Russia. The Russian Federation may disintegrate as a result of this process. Experts who study Russia believe that the Russian Federation will undergo a major change in the future and will lose power. This process will accelerate if the Russian people manage to start a huge revolt. The Russian people can change world history. The Ukrainian army has established a huge superiority over the Russian army due to the support it has received recently, and the high morale of the army thinking that this superiority was destroyed by the deliberate withdrawal of Ukrainian soldiers in Bakhmut. The Russian media started to make propaganda about this region, but Putin, realizing that the Ukrainian army was now so strong that the Russians could no longer breathe, made a very different plan. He started to play some of his soldiers, especially the inexperienced ones on the front lines of the Bakhmut front. These soldiers, whom he wanted to absorb the first damage in the event of a possible attack, responded very harshly to Putin. And the Russian army is left with its biggest problem so far. It was recently revealed that even the basic needs of the Russian army in terms of both ammunition and supplies could not be met. As a result of heavy opposition from both certain groups within the army and the Russian people, some strings began to unravel in the Russian army. The impulse to surrender to the Ukrainian army, including some senior soldiers, has been mobilized. At the same time, some soldiers started to take certain steps to fight against Putin's mismanagement. But they were met with a very harsh response by Putin, which led to the suppression of the uprisings in the Russian army. The beginning of it all came when a group of soldiers contacted their commanders because they were uncomfortable with these policies. This issue, which is considered to be one of the most fundamental points of the disintegration in the Russian army, turned things completely in favor of Ukraine. But the Russian soldiers who told the details of this meeting shared the blood-curdling facts with the whole world. First of all, the Russian soldiers wanted to contact their commanders about their discontent with the existing order. After not being able to reach their commander for some time, they, together with other soldiers, demanded a logical explanation for their being openly prioritized in Bakhmut. The Russian commander's answers did not satisfy any of the soldiers in the group. The commander, who was aware of the inadequacy of the answers, expressed that he was uncomfortable with this situation and that he would soon forward the questions to the Kremlin for a response. In this process, the group of Russian soldiers who wanted to contact the commander again to reiterate their demands for the inhuman treatment of Russian soldiers and the process in which they served as a set in this region, received a negative response. Again, in addition, with the shortage of supplies and ammunition on the agenda, every soldier in that region had the impression that the troubles in the Russian army would increase even more. Russian soldiers who thought that the Russian army would lose in the near future if it continued to be mismanaged in this way, informed the Kremlin of their demands. In response to their demands and rhetoric, Russian soldiers mobilized when they received the news that the Russian army had deployed the National Guard. Putin's personal army to conduct inspections in these regions. Aware of the National Guard's pretense of holding the highest rank in military headquarters, the group decided to leave the army and fight in the ranks of Ukraine to overthrow this unjust order in order to make the Ukrainian army aware of this breakthrough. The group contacted the I Want to Live hotline and set off at night at the first light of the morning. They took photos as a great challenge to Russia and its army. Putin's treacherous plans were also revealed when these soldiers, whom Russia keeps on the front line, switched sides. The fact that he did not value the soldiers in the Russian army and openly left the soldiers in this region to die drew reaction from both the world public opinion and the Russian press. As a result of Putin's reckless behavior, the number of groups joining Ukraine has gradually increased, and the families of conscripted soldiers have protested intensely when it became clear that Putin could not solve many problems within the army. The people in the Kremlin signaled a co-op. That's what worried Putin, and the streets suddenly turned into a war zone. The recent successive victories of the Ukrainian army have started to increase the anger of the Russian people against Putin. The intense coverage of such developments in the world press and the open withdrawal of Putin, even from the regions he has won, have made the Russian people very angry. In addition to all this, things got completely confused with Putin's mistreatment of the soldiers he forcibly recruited into the army within the scope of mobilization. The Russian people who are aware of how strong the army is from past operations are now aware that Putin's policies in many areas have disrupted the stability and balance of power within the army. As a result of such developments, the Ukrainian army has become much more mentally resilient, while the Russian army's capabilities have been reduced, and it turns out that Putin is in a worse and worse position. If things continue like this, Putin will completely lose both military support and popular support. This will lead to a complete shaking of Putin's throne. But the comments made by war analysts on this issue have resonated all over the world. According to war analysts, it is known that the Ukrainian army has taken a very serious lead, especially against the Russians. This latest situation has started to raise big questions about Russia's dominance in the region. The fact that not only Ukraine, but also many of the neighboring countries have raised their voices against Russia has also revealed a major shift in Russia's authority. Russia, which continues to lose blood after such results, is expected to withdraw from Ukrainian territory in a short time if these developments continue. It is foreseen that the Ukrainian army will complete its victory in an absolute line and with the support of the countries around it. In other words, this step taken by Ukraine has actually paved the way for the peoples who have been troubled and oppressed by Russia for a long time to take action against Russia in reaction. Ukraine's counteroffensive, which has been on the agenda since the beginning of the year, may end the war in 2023. The Ukrainian counterattack, which was expected in April, was postponed to May due to the difficulties caused by the climatic conditions of the Donbas region. The prolongation of the arms procurement schedule and the time it took for the Ukrainian soldiers to train for these new weapons. In particular, the decisiveness of climatic conditions is an essential element for the success of military operations in this geography. The Ukrainian army must penetrate the 900-kilometer-long Russian defense line in at least two main axes and pose a threat to the Russian resistance at a few more points. High-speed armored vehicles equipped with Bradley Stryker or Humvee-type heavy weapons will play an important role in both the eastern front line and in cutting the Russian supply routes in the north of the Sea of Azov. In addition, flash developments that raise questions about the early finale of the Ukrainian war are taking place in the Bakhmut front line. Ukrainian special forces make history in Bakhmut, the stronghold of the eastern front line. According to a statement from the Ukrainian armed forces, a Russian machine gun placed on the Bakhmut skyscraper was shot down by the Ukrainian forces. After the announcement, video footage of the explosion was shared on social media platforms. The missile, launched from the M777 howitzer, targeted a multi-story building where the machine gun crew was located. A powerful explosion occurred as the missile successfully hit the building. After the explosion, huge clouds of dust rose into the skies of Bakhmut. Whether the destroyed machine gun belonged to the Wagner Group or the Russian Defense Ministry created controversy on social media. Robley, a senior researcher at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, tweeted that the gun belonged to Wagner. The Wagner Group, which has been struggling with a lack of ammunition for months, was badly wounded in the last attack. Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin, wrote in a recent Telegram video message that a sufficient number of various foreign-made armored vehicles and a large number of drones appeared in the Ukrainian troops. Yevgeny Prigozhin noted that the Ukrainian forces were well-equipped, well-trained, coordinated, and resisted with dignity. Prigozhin reiterated the lack of materials, saying that they would withdraw from Bakhmut. However, 2 days after this statement, the Wagner leader made new statements that would fall on the agenda like a bombshell. Prigozhin claimed in an audio statement on his channel on the Telegram messaging app that they were promised as much ammo and armament as they needed to keep going. It is unclear whether the ammunition promised to Mr. Prigozhin can be deployed quickly enough to change the war. On the other hand, new images show that the Ukrainian special forces declared war on Putin. Although the MTBS are lightly armed and armored, the Russian forces continue to use vehicles near the front lines without adequate support. Ukrainian forces moved to destroy an abused Russian vehicle. A video posted on social media showed a Russian light tow truck MTB trying to take cover next to a row of trees when it was targeted by a Ukrainian drone. The ready-to-use drone dropped a small bomb that destroyed the vehicle. When the bomb hit, the Russian armored vehicle exploded with a loud bang. After the explosion, the Russian battleship surrendered to the flames. The drone attack seen in the video was carried out by Ukraine's elite 73rd Naval Special Purpose Center. This is a military intelligence unit, structurally part of the Special Operations Forces of Ukraine. Ukraine's special forces are the same elite forces of Russia, often called Spetsnaz. Ukrainian elite troops are generally equivalent to United States Navy SEALs or the UK Special Boat Service. Elite forces continue to use drone strikes to hit Russian vehicles close to the front lines. They also participate in other special forces operations. Troops of the 73rd Naval Special Purpose Center were responsible for the attack on the occupied Snake Island last summer. Now, let's get to know this destroyed Russian vehicle more closely. Russia has been operating light-duty towing vehicles since the early 1970s and has thousands in service. Interestingly, the vehicles are now produced at the Kharkiv tractor plant in Ukraine. The metal bow is designed to tow a trailer or gun up to 6,500 kilograms or to carry equipment up to 2,000 kilograms. Alternatively, a total of 11 soldiers can be carried inside the hull. Soldiers can enter and exit the vehicle through the 2 rear doors. The Elba was not really designed as an armored personnel carrier. Instead, it was developed as a multi-purpose tracked carrier that could be adapted to provide a range of armored support vehicle roles. While the vehicle has a fully welded steel armored hull, the Elba is designed to be fully amphibious and can navigate on water with its tracks. It's unclear how the Elba seen in the last video was used, but it most likely served as an APC to move troops near the front lines. On the other hand, weapons, ammunition, and other combat systems sent to Ukraine, mainly from NATO countries in a 40-month period, are unprecedented in terms of quantity and quality. Just the US aid to Ukraine in the last 40 months reached $71 billion. If we include other major backers such as the UK, Germany, Japan, the Netherlands, Canada, and Poland, the total value of military aid is over $105 billion if we include the vehicles and weapons systems that Ukraine has paid for. The magnitude of the aid will be understood more clearly in terms of quality. There is no analog of such military aid in history. Bradley IFV armored vehicles from the USA, M109 howitzer artillery systems from Italy, MiG-29 warplanes from Slovakia, Leopard 2 tanks from almost all NATO countries, many different types of anti-tank weapons and their ammunition, and kamikaze drones constitutes the content of military aid. Patriot air defense systems were also activated as of April 23. But can Ukraine arm to the teeth end the war, declaring that the war will end only with the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity? The fate of the Zelensky administration depends on its armies making a devastating advance in the Donbass and Crimea direction at the same time. Despite the limited means and weapons resources, the Ukrainian army was able to hold the city of Bakhmut in the Donbass region and repulse the Russian troops at many points.